It was a bitterly cold morning when Jake Mitchell stepped outside to start his truck. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale, golden glow over the frost-covered ground. The wind howled through the leafless trees, cutting through layers of clothing like a blade. As he took a deep breath, his exhale visible in the frigid air, something unusual caught his eye near the edge of his yard. A small, unmoving shape lay partially hidden beneath a bush. At first, he thought it might be a discarded blanket or a pile of rags blown in by the wind. But as he stepped closer, his stomach tightened. It wasn't fabric, it was a dog. The animal was curled up tightly, its matted fur dusted with frost. Even from a few feet away, Jake could see its ribs protruding beneath the thin coat, its body unnaturally still. His heart pounded as he crouched down, reaching a hesitant hand toward the creature. That was when he saw it. Tucked against the larger dog's side was a much smaller bundle, barely the size of a football. A puppy! Jake's breath hitched. The pup was even worse off than the older dog. Its tiny body was stiff, its eyes closed, and for a horrifying moment, he thought both animals were already gone. But then a faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall of the mother dog's chest. Panic surged through him. He had to act fast. Without a second thought, Jake shrugged off his thick flannel jacket and scooped the pair into his arms. The larger dog, though barely conscious, let out a weak whimper, its breath shaky and labored. The puppy didn't stir at all. "Hang in there, girl," Jake murmured, cradling them against his chest as he rushed back inside. The warmth of his house was a stark contrast to the brutal cold outside. He laid the dogs on a thick pile of blankets near the fireplace and grabbed his phone to call the nearest animal rescue. While waiting for someone to pick up, he rubbed the puppy gently, trying to coax some life back into its little body. It was touch and go. The puppy was dangerously cold, and the mother wasn't in much better shape. Jake could only hope help would arrive in time. But just when he thought he had seen the worst, he made a shocking discovery, one that would change everything. Jake knelt beside the unconscious mother dog and her barely breathing puppy, his heart hammering as he rubbed their frail bodies, hoping to transfer some warmth. The larger dog let out a soft, painful whimper, her eyelids fluttering but not fully opening. The puppy was worse. Its body felt like ice in his hands. "Come on, little guy," Jake murmured, wrapping the puppy in a towel and rubbing gently. Minutes passed like hours. The fire crackled beside them, its heat creeping into their frozen limbs. The mother dog's chest rose and fell with shallow, shaky breaths, and Jake dared to hope. But something about the scene gnawed at him. How had these dogs ended up in his yard, barely clinging to life? Then he noticed something odd. There were scratches on the mother dog's side, deep, fresh, as if she had been in a fight. Her fur was tangled with dirt, ice, and what looked like dried blood. It wasn't hers, though. The wounds didn't match the amount of blood in her fur. Something had happened before she collapsed here. Jake's gut told him this wasn't just another case of an abandoned stray. He stood up, pulling his coat back on. He had to check the yard. Stepping outside, the morning light had grown stronger, revealing tracks in the snow. Not just paw prints, but something bigger. Something dragged. His breath caught as he followed the trail toward the trees bordering his property. And then he saw it. Near the tree line, half buried in the snow, was another dog. But this one wasn't alive. Jake swallowed hard, forcing himself to move closer. The animal was large, possibly a German Shepherd or Husky mix. Its fur was thick, its body stiff with the cold. But there was something deeply unsettling about the scene. The dog hadn't just frozen to death. Its body was twisted, its muzzle locked in a final, silent snarl. Claw marks in the snow. Signs of a struggle. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. The mother dog, she had been protecting something. Someone. He turned back toward his house, his boots crunching in the snow, adrenaline flooding his system. He needed answers. He needed to know what had happened last night. As he reached his porch, a soft whimper drifted from inside. He rushed in. The mother dog was moving, barely. Her eyes had cracked open, and though she was weak, she was trying to rise. Her gaze locked on Jake, filled with exhaustion, but also something else, determination. And then she did something that made Jake's blood turn to ice. She growled. Not at him, but toward the window. Jake spun around, following her gaze. There, just beyond the tree line where he had found the dead dog, something moved. A shadow. A shape too big to be another stray. A predator. Jake's breath caught as he slowly stepped toward the window. The wind rustled the trees, and for a split second, he thought he saw a pair of gleaming yellow eyes staring back at him. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the shape disappeared into the forest. The mother dog let out another low growl, then whimpered and slumped back down, too weak to do anything more. Jake ran a hand through his hair. His mind raced. This wasn't just a case of stray dogs fighting over food. This dog, this mother, had gone up against something much bigger and far more dangerous. And she had survived, but just barely. But what had she been protecting? He looked down at the puppy, still wrapped in a towel by the fire. It was breathing a little more steadily now, but it was still weak. Then another thought struck him. What if there had been more? Jake's stomach twisted. If the mother had risked her life to protect her pup, could there have been others? Was something or someone still out there? He didn't have time to hesitate. Grabbing a flashlight and a heavier coat, he stepped back outside. He had to follow those tracks. Had the mother dog dragged herself and her puppy to his house after the fight? Had she lost the rest of her litter? Had she been protecting them from whatever was in those woods? Jake had seen animal attacks before. He'd grown up in the countryside, familiar with coyotes, even the rare mountain lion. But this didn't feel like a normal predator attack. The sheer force of what had taken down that larger dog, it didn't sit right. Something about this was different, and he had to find out why. The cold gnawed at Jake's skin as he trudged toward the tree line, following the faint trail of disturbed snow. His breath came in sharp puffs, and every step felt heavier than the last. The weight in his chest wasn't just from the biting wind. It was from the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The mother dog had fought to get here, dragging her unconscious puppy to his doorstep. But from what? And more importantly, was it still out there? Jake tightened his grip on the flashlight as he reached the spot where the dead dog lay. He hesitated before kneeling beside it, scanning the surrounding snow. The claw marks were deeper here, erratic, like the dog had fought for its life before succumbing. But against what? A coyote wouldn't leave scratches like this. A mountain lion might. But there were no signs of a cat's distinct tracks. Instead, something else caught his eye. A different set of prints half covered by the fresh snowfall. Bigger than a dog's. And not quite human. Jake's pulse quickened. The tracks were deep, wide, and oddly shaped, like something had moved through on two legs but with a strange, dragging gait. He'd been in these woods all his life, but he had never seen anything like this before. A deep unease settled in his gut. He turned his flashlight toward the trees. The forest stood in eerie silence. No birds, no rustling of small creatures, just the sound of the wind threading through the branches. Something moved, a shadow, swift and silent, just beyond the reach of his beam. Jake froze. Then a low, guttural growl rumbled through the air, coming from above. His heart slammed against his ribs as he snapped his head upward, aiming the flashlight at the trees. For a split second, he saw something large, with glowing yellow eyes staring down at him from the branches. The reflection of the light turned them into burning orbs, and before he could fully register what he was seeing, the figure leaped. Jake barely had time to move before it crashed into the snow just feet from where he stood. A massive, hulking shape, too fast, too big, and moving on two legs before dropping into an unnatural crouch. Jake stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The thing didn't belong here. It wasn't an animal he recognized. Its limbs were too long, its movements too calculated. The beast let out another growl, low and guttural, almost intelligent. And then it turned its head toward the house, toward the mother dog. Jake's instincts kicked in. No, he wouldn't let this thing get anywhere near her. He took a slow, deliberate step back, reaching for the hunting knife he always carried. The beast didn't move, but he could feel its breath in the cold air. Then something strange happened. The mother dog's bark, weak but determined, echoed from the house. The creature flinched. For the first time, it hesitated. Jake didn't wait. He grabbed a fistful of snow and threw it, the motion breaking the stillness. The creature let out a snarl, stepping back toward the shadows. Its yellow eyes locked onto him for a final, chilling moment. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Silence. Jake stood there, his heart hammering, his breath ragged. What had he just seen? And why had it reacted to the dog's bark like that? He didn't know, but one thing was clear. Whatever that thing was, the mother dog had faced it before. And somehow, she had survived. Jake turned back toward the house, his mind racing. There was more to this than just a stray dog and her pup, and he needed to find out the truth before it was too late. Jake burst through the front door, his pulse hammering in his ears. He slammed the door shut behind him and locked it, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He didn't know what that thing in the woods was, but he knew one thing for certain. It had been watching, and it wanted the mother dog. He turned toward the fireplace. The mother dog lay weakly on the blankets, her breathing labored but steady. The puppy, still wrapped in the towel, let out a faint whimper, small but alive. Jake crouched beside them, his hand shaking as he reached out to the mother dog. She barely lifted her head, but her golden eyes met his with something almost human. A silent understanding passed between them. "You fought that thing, didn't you?" Jake whispered. Her tail gave the smallest wag. Then she let out a low, rumbling whimper, shifting slightly to reveal something nestled beneath her thick, matted fur. Jake's brow furrowed. He leaned in closer, and that's when he saw it. A deep wound on her side, clawed open, but not just from a struggle. Something had burned into her flesh. The edges of the wound weren't just torn, they were charred. Like the touch of whatever had attacked her had been searing hot. Jake swallowed hard. This was no ordinary predator. But the mother dog had survived. And not just survived, she had fought back. The puppy let out another tiny whimper, and the mother responded with a weak nuzzle, pressing her nose against its small body as if reassuring it. Jake ran a hand through his hair. His thoughts were racing. This dog, this mother, wasn't just any stray. She was something else, something more. And whatever was out there in the woods, it wasn't finished. A sudden, sharp noise shattered the silence. A thud against the house. Then another. Jake's head snapped toward the window. Shadows moved just beyond the glass. The mother dog let out a low, warning growl, trying to push herself up. Jake grabbed his hunting rifle from the rack near the door, heart pounding. He flicked off the safety and stepped toward the window, peering outside. And then it moved. The creature. Closer this time. Lurking just at the edge of the porch, its yellow eyes gleamed like burning coals. Its breath fogged in the frigid air, the twisted shape of its body now fully visible in the dim light. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was something out of a nightmare. Too big, too human-like, with elongated limbs and clawed hands. And in one of those hands, it held something, a scrap of fabric. Jake's gut clenched. It was a piece of an old collar. Recognition hit him like a freight train. This thing had known the mother dog before, and she had escaped it. The creature let out a guttural, inhuman sound, a twisted blend of a growl and a hiss. The noise made every hair on Jake's body stand on end. The mother dog barked, her voice stronger this time, her body shaking with effort as she rose. The creature snarled and lunged. Glass shattered as the window exploded inward. Jake barely had time to react before the thing was inside, moving with terrifying speed. He raised the rifle and fired, the shot deafening in the small space. The bullet struck its shoulder, sending it reeling back with an ear-piercing screech. But it wasn't dead. It turned its head slowly, those glowing eyes narrowing. Then it moved toward the mother dog. She stood her ground, teeth bared, a fierce growl ripping from her throat. Even in her weakened state, she placed herself between the creature and her puppy. Jake fired again. The second shot struck its leg, sending it crashing to the floor. But instead of retreating, the creature let out a furious snarl, its body changing. The shadows around it seemed to pulse and twist. Its form flickered, shifting between something almost human and something far, far worse. Jake's stomach dropped. This wasn't just an animal. It was something else entirely. And the mother dog had faced it before. She lunged. Despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, she launched herself at the creature with every ounce of strength she had left. Her teeth sank into its arm, and for the first time, the creature let out a howl of pain. It flailed, knocking over furniture, but the mother dog didn't let go. Her jaws locked down, tearing into its flesh with a strength that no ordinary dog should have had. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fire poker from the hearth and drove it straight into the creature's chest. A high-pitched, unearthly screech filled the air. The thing thrashed, its body convulsing, shadows writhing around it like living smoke. Its eyes, those awful, glowing eyes, flickered. And then, with one final, agonized scream, it collapsed. For a long moment, everything was still. Jake's breaths came in ragged gasps. His hands shook as he stared down at the unmoving body. The air around it shimmered with something unnatural, something wrong. Then slowly the body dissolved. The shadows around it unraveled, dissipating into the cold air like smoke vanishing into the wind. Within seconds, there was nothing left. No body, no blood, just emptiness. Jake let out a shuddering breath. It was over. He turned to the mother dog. She had collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. But as Jake knelt beside her, she lifted her head. Her golden eyes met his, and in them he saw something gratitude. She had fought this thing before. She had survived, and now she had won. Jake reached out, running a hand gently over her head. "You did good, girl." The puppy let out a tiny yip, nuzzling against her side. Jake exhaled, his chest tightening. He had no idea what had just happened, what that thing had been, but he knew one thing for certain. This dog, this mother, wasn't just a stray. She was a survivor. And whatever her story was, she and her pup had found a new home. With him, the house was eerily quiet in the aftermath. The wind howled outside, rattling the broken window, but inside, the only sounds were the soft crackling of the fire and the steady breathing of the mother dog and her pup. Jake sat on the floor beside them, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. What was that thing? Why had it been after them? How had the mother dog survived it before? But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that she had fought. She had protected her pup, and now they were safe. Jake reached out, running his fingers gently over the mother dog's thick fur. She let out a tired but content sigh, pressing her nose against his palm. The puppy, warm and safe for the first time in who knows how long, nestled closer to her side. A lump formed in Jake's throat. This dog, this fierce, resilient creature, had endured things no animal should have to. She had gone up against something far beyond the natural world and survived. Not just for herself, for her puppy. Jake had always believed in strength. He had grown up working on his grandfather's farm, had spent his life fixing things with his hands. But this dog had shown him a different kind of strength. The kind that wasn't just about muscle or survival instincts. The kind that came from love, a deep, unwavering, sacrificial love. And as he sat there, watching the mother dog nuzzle her pup, he realized something else. Maybe he had needed saving just as much as they had. For too long, Jake had been alone. His home was just a house, his life just a series of routine days. But now, with these two souls curled up beside him, something shifted inside him. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. Over the next few days, Jake did everything he could to care for them. The mother dog, despite her wounds, grew stronger with each passing day. She ate ravenously, drank warm broth from his hands, and never let her puppy out of her sight. Jake made a bed for them near the fireplace, but more often than not, he found them curled up on an old blanket by his feet as he worked. The puppy, once weak and barely breathing, became a little ball of energy. It tumbled over Jake's boots, nipping at his shoelaces, making tiny, playful growls that melted the last icy barriers around Jake's heart. He named the mother dog Sable, for her dark, rich coat and the quiet dignity in her eyes. And the little pup? Ash, because from the darkness, from the cold, from the ashes of whatever nightmare they had escaped, they had survived. Jake never found out exactly what the creature had been. He searched the woods in the following weeks, but found nothing. No tracks, no remains, not even the larger dog's body. It was as if the entire event had been swallowed by the earth, leaving only a broken window and a lingering sense of unease. But every now and then, when he stepped outside at night, he felt it. A presence, watching from the trees, waiting. And yet, he wasn't afraid. Because this time, he wasn't alone. Sable would always stand beside him. She had fought before, and she would fight again if she had to. Jake didn't know where she had come from, what horrors she had seen before that night. But he knew one thing for certain. She was meant to be here, with him. There was a time when Jake might have overlooked a stray dog shivering in the cold, might have assumed it was just another animal struggling to survive. But now he understood something much deeper. Every animal has a story. Every soul, no matter how small or broken, carries a strength we often don't see. And sometimes those we think we are rescuing end up rescuing us. Sable and Ash had been left for dead. They had been hunted, hurt, and abandoned. But they had fought to live. Because love, pure, unbreakable, fearless love, was stronger than anything that had tried to destroy them. And in the end, that love had won. Jake glanced down at Sable, who rested her head against his knee, her golden eyes filled with quiet trust. Ash, the tiny pup who had once been so close to death, tumbled over her paws, letting out an excited yip. Jake smiled. Their story wasn't one of tragedy. It was one of survival, of family, of a love that defied the odds. And as he looked out toward the darkened woods, toward whatever mysteries still lurked beyond the trees, he knew one thing for certain. They would face the future together, no matter what came next.